Hi, and welcome back to the Pit Lane, a Formula One podcast where we talk about everything Formula One. In this episode, we'll briefly touch on the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix and focus more on the Australian GP, which happened this past weekend. I am your host, Jordan Wynn, and alongside me is my co-host, Alden Kaywell. How you doing, Alden?
I'm doing well, Jordan. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, nice little break we had. We had about a month off. We're both kind of busy, but here we are.
Here we are. 3 races into the season, 2 to cover here tonight. But they were different races, but they were both pretty interesting for their own reasons.
Yeah, but we'll start with some news.
Yep.
As we always do. Let's see here. First thing we have, March 22nd. We have an official date. McLaren announced that the Bahraini Sovereign Wealth Fund, Mumtalakat, is that right? Am I pronouncing that right?
Mumtalakat
has purchased the remaining shares of McLaren to take over the sole ownership of the car brand, including the F1 team. They previously held a 60% stake in McLaren, but now they own the whole thing.
That's pretty interesting.
It is. Foreign, sovereign nation, foreign fund, whatever, but they had a higher stake, I believe, in the team before that, actually, percentage-wise, I guess. So they have more control there, but now they have full control. It'll make it interesting, and I'm sure they'll hold on to that for quite some time as it's only growing in popularity, Formula One as a whole, and the value keeps going up, and the team's working their way up.
Yeah, this is a good time. People are selling high probably on the McLaren stock. They're doing very well on the F1 circuit, maybe not on the car brand selling cars. I'm just not familiar with it, but we've seen sovereign wealth funds, nation states make their way into the world of sports, particularly in the soccer world. Newcastle United was bought by the Saudi wealth fund. Qatar, the wealth fund of Qatar owns PSG. We've seen some other investments in Europe with soccer clubs. Some of these organizations, these wealth funds, seem to appear to be diversifying into auto racing. It's natural. I know that McLaren had sold some of their stock to, or other shareholders had sold to Bahraini Wealth Fund during COVID times. Okay. This stake that they've held has continued to grow over time. They got a lot of money, so we'll see what kind of investment this brings for McLaren. Will they get new infrastructure? Will they get additional heads? Will certain things grow for the Formula One team? Will they bring in more sought-after engineers or designers who are, require the premium money that are exempt from the cost cap?
Yep, I was just going to bring that up.
Right.
Yep.
So I don't know. We'll see where that brings the Formula One team. I think this probably just allows them better day-to-day management in terms of decision-making by just having sole ownership, a clear vision, single shareholder.
So kind of the opposite of Alpine situation. Clear vision. Know what they want to do and where they want to go.
Yes. Yeah, no, you hit it right on there.
Yeah, and to kind of continue on that point, Zach Brown also got a contract extension through, I think, 2023 or 2030.
Wow.
Holy cow.
Wow.
2030. I don't know if it's through then or up till then, but that's still quite a few years, at least 5-6 years. And I think he does get a lot of credit for what he's done since, 2017, 16?
16, 17. I was like literally when they hit
it was
rock
like the
bottom.
Honda. It was like the end of the Honda era. It was McLaren, and he brought in tons of sponsors. He really boosted that team. Got the right people in place. It seems gave them a sense of direction here. They got a new wind tunnel out of all these sponsors and everything too, so that's huge for them. And you were going to make a comment on?
No, we were talking a little bit before we started recording about the sponsorships that have come McLaren's way, and it's just like if you see some old highlights of Alonso driving in that Papaya
with
McLaren,
nothing on it,
literally nothing on it, and it's like, whoa,
it's only his sunglasses,
correct, Kimona and McLaren,
and maybe a Honda
and a Honda badge.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my god. And, you look at the car now, and obviously, like, car designs have come a long way. Sponsorship placement has come, a long way. But the car is, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but it is riddled with sponsorships.
Absolutely.
Kudos.
You got
You need
Google.
those. You Google. Hello?
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's crazy.
It's a stark difference from where they were not even 10 years
Right.
ago.
And hopefully that type of investment pays off for both the sponsors because it's good for Formula One, but also pays off for McLaren and the people who are working there, and they continue to thrive. I really like the fact that we still have these teams in Formula One that aren't wholly works teams that are succeeding. Like Williams has had a lot of success over the years. So has McLaren. And each of them has had partnerships with the different engine manufacturers, but Formula One is better off with teams like that making partnerships with outside engine manufacturers or other engine manufacturers within the sport.
Yeah. Yep.
And having just 10 teams of works teams would be a slightly more boring competition.
It would be cool to see many of those companies involved, but at the same time, I think you'd end up with, some of the teams would be under the same umbrella.
Yeah.
Like manufacturer umbrella, like, oh yeah, we got Porsche, but we also have
Volkswagen.
Yeah, we have an Audi. And it's like, okay, well, is it really different?
Who's doing what work?
Right. You just rebadge the engine. Like, what's the plan here? But yeah, no, I agree. Let's move on to the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix that happened a couple weeks ago now. But just a couple things we wanted to touch on since we didn't do a podcast in between Australia and Bahrain.
Yep.
Carlos Sainz did not drive because he had appendicitis. Had to get his appendix taken out after FP2. I believe he ran the first 2 practice sessions, which is ridiculous.
Painful.
Yeah. And decided, we should probably get checked out and go to the hospital. Yeah. Got to get your appendix taken out. I had my appendix taken out.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, I've not.
Yeah. And I think I did not feel well that entire day. I don't know how you could have driven
200 miles an hour.
Yeah.
In 90-degree heat.
It's 60-minute sessions 2 times. And then be like, oh, yeah, I should go to the hospital. I think after the first one, you might have been like, I should probably go. But I digress.
The mental strength. It
Yes.
is indicative of some insane mental strength.
Yes, and they are very fit, too. So I'm sure there's a lot of stuff they can deal with that, I probably couldn't. Let's be real. But, yeah, Ollie Behrman comes in. 17-year-old?
17-year-old reserve driver, thereabouts.
Yep, he drives an F2 right now. And he comes in the car. He gets 1 practice session.
Just FP3.
He qualifies 11th. He barely misses out on Lewis Hamilton's time.
Right.
To get into Q3. Finishes P7, drives pretty much flawlessly during the race.
Yep.
Does everything he needs to do.
Yep.
P7. It's a great drive by him. Didn't,
And then shows up to school Monday morning.
yeah, essentially.
Insane day. Insane weekend. So what'd you do for your weekend, Ollie? Oh, just went to Saudi Arabia, race for Formula One, no big deal.
I had to do the qualifying sessions and everything else for F2 and then realized, they needed me for an F1. Had to adjust, do a practice, and then qualify, and then do a race.
Insane.
Yeah. They also showed his headrest. I don't know if you saw those pictures afterwards. They showed his, the padding that's next to the driver's head on each side. That, they were dented. Because the neck strength of an F1 driver needed versus an F2 driver is drastically different.
Oh, man.
And they were huge dents on each side, and they showed
Because his head's just getting whipped back and forth.
right
Oh,
after all the
man.
time. You're doing 50-some laps at a high-speed circuit.
26, 27 corners in Jeddah.
There's a lot.
There's
a lot of high-speed ones, too. A lot of
that
G-forces.
Poor kid.
Yeah, and they showed him next to Charles, a side-by-side.
Oh, okay.
And Charles, obviously more steady, and Ollie's just toward the end of the race, just slapping the side. And you're like, holy cow, this guy should get checked out for concussion syndromes here.
Oh, man.
But that being said, great drive by him. They're obviously talking after the race, hyping him up because it was, great drive, P7. Talking about, he needs to get into a seat next year, blah, 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 which, This is how things work in F1. And I'm sure he'll end up with a seat. But, in the future, next year, we'll find out. There are a lot of driver contracts that are up next year. But
Yeah. And there's some Ferrari linked teams that could potentially have an opening.
Haas.
Maybe Haas. They got two veterans, if you will, who could potentially make way.
Yeah.
If Ferrari so chose or whatever.
I'm sure Ferrari would throw them, some money or some engine discounts, and they won't need as much as that Chipotle money over at Haas. But, we'll find out. Another thing we kind of wanted to note that at least I found interesting was watching Lewis Hamilton behind, I believe it was Oscar Piastri going through the high-speed corners, and it was surreal that how slow the Mercedes was in the high-speed cornering sections versus the McLaren. Obviously, it's a character trait of the cars.
Yep.
But with such high ambitions, Mercedes switching to a new concept and then just watching Piastri disappear in like 3 corners from, Lewis is like a half a second behind in DRS to 2 seconds.
In one sector.
Yeah. And I think they were showing the speed traps in that sector, and they were slower than Alpine was by like 4 kilometers an hour. Like they were the slowest car in that section. And I don't know if that was part of the wing or the downforce that they put on the wings.
Or maybe
whatever.
some tire characteristics.
Right. But it was a real bad look for a team that had high ambitions this year. And all of a sudden, you're behind the McLaren, who's an engine customer, so they're running the same engine.
The same engine as you.
And it's just totally disheartening.
And Lewis was really vocal about it.
Yeah, and I think George made a comment too about it too. But I was
Toto's working overtime.
Yeah.
Or he should be. The other thing I wanted to touch on that we don't have here in our notes, but I wanted to touch on for the race was the penalty situation for Magnussen and deliberately, quote unquote, deliberately holding up other drivers to secure points for Nico Hülkenberg.
Yeah.
At some point during the race, this part I didn't see, Kevin Magnussen was given a 5-second penalty for something.
Yep.
But instead of serving that penalty there and then, he was able to back up the field behind him and just run a masterclass in defense.
Yes.
And not letting, I think it was Albon and a train of cars behind him.
Albon, Ricardo, Yuki.
Okay.
I think
it was like 3 or 4 other guys. Yeah. And they couldn't pass Magnussen because it's a very tight, narrow circuit.
Yep.
The characteristics, there's very few straights. There are DRS zones, but like it's just corner.
The Haas was
corner.
fast in a straight line.
The Haas was fast. But do you think that it should be that somehow Formula One should attempt to figure out a way to better institute penalties in situations like this so that a team can't gamesmanship a point secure? Because it's not Albon's fault. He was essentially also penalized because someone else had to serve a penalty to no fault of his own. So he has to basically get backed up, lose all this time to a car that they know they're purposely trying to defend point position for another car.
Sure. This is probably a bigger discussion then, because if you're talking about giving more of a penalty or something more severe, like forcing him to pit or forcing him to get out of the way when he didn't have to. It's because he's fighting for position, you could say, right? And so let's kind of go back. So let's go to Monaco, where Daniel Ricciardo had his gearbox issues, and he was clearly holding up Vettel, I think at the time.
But this was for a victory.
Doesn't matter. This is for a point. This is for points.
Yeah. Okay.
So what does that matter, right? If he's sure, he's not intentionally holding him up, but he also is, because he's blocking in the situations where Vettel could have passed him based on his gearbox issues.
But it's a penalty versus like a defect of the car.
Yeah, but how can you then? Were you going to make him get out of the way because he has a defect in the car? That's not. How do I say? Not detrimental to like an on-track issue, like, oh, my front wing's falling off. You know, it's not like a black and an orange flag
Right.
situation. Would you force him to have to get out of the way because he's too slow in a sector?
A penalty, but like the whole point of the penalty is to say you did something wrong.
Right.
You ruined other people's races while gamesmanshipping your own, or you're manufacturing a points finish for your other driver. I think those two things are different, right? Like Daniel Ricciardo racing in a Red Bull to try and ward off Vettel in a Ferrari on the streets of Monaco to a victory. There's nothing illegal with his car. If it's spitting out oil and hydraulics, like, that guy's got to pay it.
Yep.
Hey, come on.
Yeah.
But like, if you were just like, oh, I'm going to back up the field, even though I know I have a penalty, I just feel like that's not, Haas did nothing wrong because there's nothing saying that the penalty has to be served in a specific manner, aside from it has to be served before the end of the race. I'm not blaming Haas. I think that given the current loopholes allowed, they did the right thing. That's what 100%. I would do.
Yep.
But should Formula One look into a way, or the FIA, the stewards or the race director, figure out a way to be like, look, if you've been given a penalty in the race, you must serve it within X amount of laps?
No. If it's at that, if we stop there, no.
Why?
Because so let's say I get a 5-second penalty for cutting a corner, or something, or passing somebody, or like passing off track and not giving position back, whatever. You're gonna make me do a 5-second stop penalty and take a pit stop and stop 5 seconds and then go?
Yeah, you cheated.
No.
I mean, you warranted the penalty.
I think that's too detrimental. I think the penalty would be too much in that scenario.
In any other sport, is the team that's penalized allowed to choose when they take their penalty?
No.
Okay.
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is they need to find a way. It would depend on what the penalty is. And I think they need to be able to gauge that better. But I don't know how they do it. Again, I don't know what his initial penalty was for. And I missed that. But they would need to be able to gauge that better. And okay, you need to come in and serve 5 seconds, or you need to come, whatever, or drive through. But like in Formula
Even
One,
just a drive through at that
that's
point.
So detrimental, like to a race. And I understand that
Well, you shouldn't cut a corner.
Right. I understand that he's backing people up. I understand like the situation. But if it's, let's say, a normal situation, racing situation, it's too much. So I don't know how you find a better gauge on that. I know what you're saying.
You're right.
I just don't know how you could enforce. Well, I know how you could enforce, but I don't know if that would help the situation.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's part of a larger conversation around penalties that the sport's having.
Well, this was an issue last year.
It was.
With I'm just going to pass this guy off track and not give him position yet because I know I'm faster than him, and I'll pull that 5 seconds.
Correct.
Which happened a number of times.
Right. If a 5-second penalty is all that's going to happen to me in the last, at the end of the race, I know that.
Or early on, I know I'm going to be able to pull it.
I'll be fine.
Yeah.
Right. But like, ultimately, there's just a lot of strategists, a lot of analysts looking at all this, figuring out ways that they can gain points and time and advantages. Right.
Yep.
I think that there were drivers caught up in poor application of the rules through no fault of their own, and they missed out on points. And that's unfortunate for them.
I don't disagree.
Right.
But again, going back, like you said preview, Haas did nothing wrong.
No.
Based on the rule.
Correct.
And I would have done the same thing. Perez did it to Hamilton.
Exactly.
Right?
A whole world championship was decided off doing this.
Yes. Effectively, yes. So, yeah.
Right.
You can go, back and forth. But yeah, it'd be a much larger conversation.
We'll see if anyone comes up with a good idea.
And this can kind of tie into, Australia coming up here and what happened with Alonso.
Yeah. We'll get back to that conversation, I guess, when we talk about his end of the race situation.
A little bit different situation, but similar.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know we kind of talked about Saudi a little bit, not too much, but
those were the
Max won
highlights.
the race, but That was pretty much
Yeah,
the
nothing.
highlights
Yeah, we
there.
didn't even talk about that. Max won.
Yeah. So not much else to talk about there. Australia. Let's get into that. Do we
Yo.
just want to go?
Oh, we had a 2-week break.
Yep.
They flew a long way, believe it or not, Jeddah to Australia, very far. It's like 8
Anywhere
hours.
to Australia.
Oh my God, it's so far. Yeah, we had a 2-week gap, and then a really, what it has been, should be, and will be the first race of the year, Australia. Sort of like, for me, it's like a marking point. Australia is the first race of the year.
Yep.
It isn't, obviously, but it should be. But it's sort of like,
It gets you into the season more.
Exactly.
I feel like.
yes,
Because you got big crowds. You got everybody's amped up for it. I know, like, oh yeah, everyone's kind of ready for Bahrain, but you already had a week of testing there, so it's kind of you've already been there for a week.
right.
Drivers have been there for a week. It's not quite the same feeling as an Australia opening with everybody that shows up there. And
Yeah.
not to say the other races are bad, but we did our track stuff, and
No, Saudi
those aren't the
Arabia is
highest
a bad
ones on our
race.
list. They're not very high on our list. But yeah, we can get into it. Ferrari had a great weekend this weekend.
They sure did.
Carlos Sainz actually ends up winning the race. Should we talk about how we got there?
Yes, go ahead. Let's get it started.
Let's see. Max qualified in P1.
Yep. First off, both the Ferraris and the Red Bulls, all 4 cars looked fast all weekend.
Yes, right from the get-go.
Yep.
Max qualified P1, Carlos P2.
Yep.
Max at the beginning of the race, after talking about like the post-interview he had, brake issues right away. From what it sounded like, there was like a caliper stuck on his brake disc or something, whatever it was.
Yeah, it's like he mentioned that the brake was stuck on.
Yes.
He was like driving almost like with a handbrake going.
Yeah.
And it got worse and worse and worse.
Yes, on one rim or on one wheel. I think it was right rear.
Rear right, yeah.
Yeah, and eventually caught fire. So and this
It exploded.
It exploded on his way back to the pit lane, the slow lane, thankfully. Yeah, Carlos passed him. I think lap 3. I want to say lap 2 or 3. Max ended up making a mistake due to the brake issue, and Carlos goes flying by, and he was within a second of DRS. And I think everybody thought that Ferrari actually had a decent shot this weekend, competing with Max and being up there with Red Bull. So the fact that he was there wasn't a surprise, but the fact that he, got by him at that time, everyone's like, "Whoa, that was quick!"
Right.
But then turns out,
Max was
seconds later, Max is
driving with a handbrake on.
smoking. Yeah, rear smoking. His car, his tire catches fire. Eventually because he's driving 3 laps
Right.
with
And
the
with
brake stuck on.
with the aerodynamics of the car, it almost looked like the engine was smoking rather than the
Yes.
brakes were smoking. So like the first few shots when we noticed and when the commentators noticed, it was like, whoa, is there something like seriously wrong with Max's car?
Reliability issue?
Exactly, because they have not had reliability issues. Then as the issue got worse over the course of the lap, it became really clear it was
apparent that right rear was on fire essentially, and
right. And like you said, like this wouldn't have we've seen Ferrari look good in qualifying. We've seen the free practice sessions where they're talking about race pace, like, oh, they've got comparative race pace, blah blah blah. The qualifying, maybe Ferrari qualifies for pole or whatever, and then Max just like runs away with it, right?
right.
And for the first few laps, we weren't seeing that. Like he was in first, he got off the line first, he made it to the first corner ahead of Carlos, but like you said, lap 2, lap 3, lap 4, he was closing the gap. He passed him. He made, he ended up getting out in front, and then Max had to pit because the car was clearly broken.
Right. And it was a pretty flawless drive by Carlos. I mean, during the weekend, he was on it all weekend.
Yep.
Qualified great.
Oh,
And his
which-
teammate Ennius is 16 days after
Right.
he had his appendix taken out.
Like we said, yeah.
I mean, and he was
Slightly lighter weight, to be fair.
yeah. So weight reduction. I don't know. I'm sure they weighed him, but I think I saw a meme with like Fred Vesser like sitting in his chair, like, what other organs can we take out? Yeah, great race from Carlos. Was on it all weekend. He wasn't even sure. I think the week leading up to it, he wasn't sure if he was going to race. He
Wow.
said.
Can you remember how quick it was for Albon to come back when he had his appendix
Can't
taken out?
remember. I think he
He had a
had a
2-week
couple
gap,
weeks,
or he had an
or was
extra
it the
one?
summer break? I can't remember when it
Oh,
was.
maybe it was the summer break.
It might have been,
Okay.
but yeah,
I'd have to look back to see how long it took him to come back because it was pretty quick.
Yeah, it was. And he didn't miss a race. Albon
Just
did
the one.
last year.
No, not last year. It was the year before when Nick DeVries said it. came in for him.
Yeah. So was it that one?
That was at Monza. Yeah.
So it wasn't the
20
break. So it was probably, there's probably a
2-week gap.
So maybe 3, depending on when he had the surgery,
Okay. Oh, yeah.
if that makes sense.
I see what you're saying.
But
Yeah.
yeah, Carlos great drive. He also mentioned that like something kind of weird here, like you could feel his insides moving differently because of the G forces, and obviously you're missing a piece that wasn't there before. Again, which is
So like the organs are settling into new
like
space.
they're moving
There's
around.
new real estate.
right. So maybe his intestines move a little bit, but
Ew, that would feel weird.
yeah, I know. Then what Albon said it like made a
they
comment.
were talking about it?
Yeah, because he had
Oh.
it done. He's like, oh yeah, you're gonna feel like these weird sensations and stuff moving that you didn't before, which makes sense because you're pulling 5Gs. And us normal people don't normally pull 5Gs in a F1 car consistently.
That's an interesting observation.
So I thought that was an interesting comment. I'm like, maybe I should have driven an F1 car before my surgery and then done it afterwards to compare. But never had the chance.
Sadly.
Yeah, disappointing, really. So yeah, Carlos P1, Charles Leclerc P2. He had a pretty great drive as well, pretty consistent. I think he qualified like 4th. Is that right?
Third
Or
or
third?
fourth? No, he qualified 4th.
4th, and then Perez had a penalty.
Yeah, so then he
Which
moved
we'll
up
get
to
into.
3.
But yeah, Charles Leclerc, good drive as well. Was told to hold a position behind Carlos later in the race, but I also think Carlos was just kind of managing and was probably, getting a little tired from
Having
driving
his
around
insides
and-
cut open.
right. Charles had a tough qualifying. I mean, P4 tough qualifying, right? But yeah, P2 for him. So Ferrari 1-2, and he had fastest lap as well.
Okay.
So Ferrari maximized points. They didn't drop the ball on the weekend where they could really maximize and hang in with Red Bull.
Yeah, I know that if Sainz had let Leclerc win, Leclerc would have ended up finishing ahead of Max in the Drivers' Championship.
Right.
As it stands, Carlos is on 40 points. Leclerc, like you mentioned, with the fastest lap stuff from Saudi Arabia and Australia is on 47, but Max is on 51.
Pretty tight.
So Max didn't finish a race, and he's still in first place,
Yep. And we're 3 races in.
just to be clear.
So,
Yeah.
Carlos also didn't race one race. So
True.
it's kind of even, right?
I mean, he's down by 11.
Should they just do points per race?
No, Max would still win.
No, but Carlos only did 2, and
So-
Max did 3.
No, Max did
See,
2.
no, Max drove 3 races.
Okay.
He didn't finish one. Whose fault is that? His team and him,
And him.
Yeah,
Oh, it was
right.
probably a him problem.
right?
Too hard on those brakes.
Oh, really? All right.
McLaren also had
yeah.
a great weekend. They finished 3rd and 4th. Norris ended up finishing 3rd, Piastri 4th. Without Red Bull being sort of in the picture, we mentioned that Perez had a penalty. Max didn't finish, but it was almost like a 1999 race. McLaren, Ferrari duking it out for the front. Seeing them battle, they had some strategy games going on with when to pit, but they had a great weekend, finishing 3rd and 4th, Norris and Piastri.
Yeah, Piastri 4th in his home race. He was running 3rd. Got told to swap positions, but it was justified.
Yep.
Piastri pitted early, had a huge undercut, forced Charles to pit early as well. Lando went long, thus Piastri was ahead of Lando once Lando pitted and came through the pits. But yeah, Norris was on it last weekend,
Yep.
pace-wise, and ended up with the podium, P3, Piastri P4. I think this continues the streak of no Aussie podiums in their home race, I think is the case.
Ever?
I think so.
Oh, goodness.
I'm like, it's quite the streak.
That's wrong.
Yeah, it is wrong considering who's come through.
Right. Weber,
Yep.
Ricardo,
Yep.
Piastri now. All right. Well, he's got something to aim for next year.
That's right. Red Bull. Perez got P5.
Yep.
He had a 3-place grid penalty from impeding Hulkenberg in qualifying.
Yep.
Was that in Q1 or 2? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was Q1. But
Yeah.
I don't quite recall.
But yeah, so he had a 3-place grid penalty, dropped him down, I think, to P6 at the
yeah.
start. Yeah, and then his race, I think, was compromised by like a visor tear off or something. Got stuck in his car, underneath his car.
Yep, that's what Horner said it, and it blocked some airflow.
Yeah.
In a area that was particularly vulnerable, or
to downforce.
To downforce, yeah.
I mean, with these ground effect cars, you need as much airflow getting underneath the car as you can, and obviously did not help him.
Yeah, we touched on Max. He didn't finish. Max not finishing basically moved everyone who we've mentioned in the finishing order up a position. Sainz essentially started 6, finished 6, but with Max not there,
Perez.
Perez. With Max not there, he just moved up. So there wasn't really a whole lot of shifting in the order of the top 5.
No, not a lot of movement. We get to Aston Martin. We can kind of. This will be more fun.
Yeah, let's talk about Aston Martin.
So should we start with Alonso? Because I think that's where this should actually start.
Yeah, I agree.
Alonso on paper finishes P8, but he came across the line in P6.
Yep.
He was there most of the race. Pretty much all race was hanging out there or near there. And last lap, it's like turn 6.
Yeah, 5, 6, 7 like area.
One of the ones they adjusted or changed over the past couple of years. He had George Russell behind him the past few laps. George was in his DRS. He ends up braking like 100 meters before the corner, and then speeding up again, and then braking again for the corner to quote unquote get a better exit. So into the high speed section to try and pull away from George.
Sure.
George was caught out by this, unsurprisingly, that a car broke 100 meters earlier than they normally would have every other lap of the race. And ends up crashing. I think he had to overcorrect, or he lost downforce, it looked like, overcorrected, ends up in the wall, ends up in the middle of the track, kind of sideways under his own, or on top of his own wheel. And Alonso's given a 20-second penalty for essentially brake checking George. How do you feel about the penalty, and do you think it's justified, essentially?
I do think it's justified. I could be convinced of either argument, truthfully. If someone was like, that's racing, baby. Wild, wild west.
That's it.
That's it. I'd be like, all right, well, that's fine. But if someone was like, yo, dude, like he brake checked him and that's really dangerous, I'd be like, all right, no, I think you're right. I think the key thing here is that you have to analyze this to a high degree to visually. I've heard visually you can see that he completely changes his approach to this corner.
Which is fine if he changes the approach.
But he didn't.
Right.
The thing about Alonso that everyone knows is he is a wily old fox. He knows exactly what he's doing. This man has raced Formula One cars for 20 years.
2 world championships.
2 world championships. Almost 3, almost 4, whatever. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he didn't intend for George to get hurt or to crash.
That's never the intent.
It's never the intent. He's trying to throw George off. He's trying to play mind games with George. Something that Fernando's quite good with. But George's correction or whatever, his approach, because it was thrown off, resulted in him going off track and then crashing and then ending up in a really dangerous position. And I think the stewards saw that and realized, look, outcomes matter. What you did directly resulted in this outcome. And had you not done that, this would not have happened. So therefore, you should be penalized.
Yep.
And I think that that's a fine argument to make, given that the evidence is slam dunk, if you will.
Yeah. Well, so let's say I agree with you. Let's start there. I completely agree. I think it was justified and deserved. Let's say, but devil's advocate, let's say he slows and doesn't brake a second time, and the same result happened. Would you then think he deserved a penalty for braking early for a corner versus, I broke early, gassed it, and then broke again?
I could see how you could
If you- basically,
effectively do the same thing, but cover your tracks better.
If he played it the way he probably intended to,
Yeah.
do you think he would deserve a penalty?
I don't think that's what he intended to do, right? Like he braked early thinking George would brake early. Then he gassed it while he went, oh, well, George is on the brakes because I braked early. So I'm going to gas it because you won't expect that. And I will create an extra gap for me.
Yeah.
That's what he was trying to do. If he brakes early for a corner and George, is like, oh, what's Fernando doing? He's braking early. I'll just pass him. He could.
Yeah.
But he didn't. And if he crashes because this is also important because the cars don't have brake lights.
Right.
So like you have to use
matters.
it matters. You have to use your eyes. Now, Fernando's car probably would have been harvesting, so the harvesting lights would have been coming on, especially if
Right.
you're off gas or and you're braking, you're probably harvesting. I don't think he would have deserved a penalty if he had just decided like, oh,
I'm gonna
slow down early because your tires do get older every lap.
Yeah.
Yes, you have less fuel, but like maybe he was legitimately told like by the team, look, you need to keep George behind you, but we feel that there's a strong chance that you will not have enough fuel for the fuel sample at the end of the race. So therefore you need to do as much lifting and coasting for the rest of the race as possible. That's a real thing that happens. So like he very well, hypothetically,
Yeah.
but FIA has the ability to monitor these radio messages. So they would have been able to be like, oh, okay, he was told to lift and coast. And in the event that he wasn't told to lift and coast and then he goes out there and does something reckless like that.
This kind of reminds me of the Saudi Arabia with Max and Lewis, where Max slowed to try and get DRS on Lewis, but then Lewis just ran into the back of him.
Right.
And broke his wing. That's what it reminded me of a little bit. Obviously, a little bit different outcomes.
Yeah.
Hamilton just destroyed his car. Hamilton ended up winning the race. But it was kind of it's different in a way where one was trying to gain an advantage, but at the same time, it's a different advantage, I guess. He wanted Lewis to pass him so he could get DRS.
Wasn't he also he was told to give up the position? Or was that
Afterwards,
a difference?
afterwards, he was.
Okay.
Afterwards, yep. But yeah, that's what it kind of reminded me of. I think Max got like a 5-second penalty after the fact.
Okay.
After the race, they gave him one. Kind of like this, but it was not like an unsporting one like this was.
Yeah. I just feel like in situations like this where you're racing for position,
Yeah, see?
I can go either way, right? Like, it's either everything's got to be wild, wild west, free for all, do whatever you want. But like, I guess as a viewer that has never driven one of these cars and doesn't live in this world, I don't know how dangerous of an application of what Fernando did. Other people feel that this was quite dangerous, which is why they gave him a 20-second penalty.
Right.
As a viewer who isn't particularly a fan of any individual racer or team, like I'm here for the sport and seeing good things. I don't want the sport to see bad things either. The outcome matters.
Yep.
George ended up in a very dangerous situation, and they felt that it was necessary to penalize Fernando.
Yep.
I'm cool with that.
Yep.
But what it meant
was Stroll got P6
instead of Fernando.
Yep. He moved up from P7 to P6. It was actually a pretty quiet weekend for Stroll for getting P6, but kind of did everything he needed to, and
Best of the rest.
that's right. And Alonso ended up P8 with the penalty, which brings us to Yuki.
Just a quick thing. Just to wrap up the conversation on Aston Martin, Mike Crack released a statement today
Oh, yeah.
talking about how they're not appealing the Alonso decision
Because they don't have new evidence.
because they don't have new evidence. Also, it's 2 points because, yes, Fernando would have been P6, Stroll would have been P7,
Yeah.
and that's only a 2-point difference. But
Well, I think they're trying to back Fernando, too, because Fernando put out like an Instagram post or something that was commenting, oh, well, this was just hard racing. I didn't think I deserved a penalty, but, we move on. kind
okay,
of a
buddy.
thing.
Okay.
And then I'm sure all the hardcore Alonso fans were like, oh, how come, this isn't being appealed, blah, 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 blah. I'm mad. And it's like, okay, here we go. Let's just say something that we can't appeal, and then we can all move on with our lives.
Right. And also, when has an appeal resulted in an
Almost
alter?
never.
So we'll just move
Other
on.
than like, oh, Ferrari had to do under the table with our engine and turn it down and not tell anybody what we were doing because no, Ferrari things.
Ferrari and
Essentially.
FIA things.
Correct. That's what happens when you have the pull of the entire sport. Yuki, RB, Racing Bulls, V-Carb, whatever you want to call it, Visa Cash App, Red Bull.
Sure. Yuki's
Toro
team.
Rosso. Yuki, P7. Great
Hell
result
yeah.
for him. Drove good all weekend, made Q3. Crushed Ricardo in qualifying.
Yeah.
It wasn't close.
Even if Ricardo's last lap hadn't been thrown out, he crushed him.
Yeah, he would have been like 2/10 in front of him or something like that. But yeah, P7 in the race, made Q3. Did everything he needed to do and just drove consistent race and was there and picked up the pieces and finished ahead of Alonso.
Yeah, to be fair, he benefited from Alonso's penalty and George crashing out.
And Max's DNF.
And Max's DNF, right? He would have been, P10 if that other stuff hadn't happened. If Max had been in the race and Alonso had finished where he's supposed to and George had not crashed. All the same.
And Hamilton.
Oh, yeah, and Hamilton. Ooh.
So it would have been P11. We haven't got
All the
there
same.
yet.
You have to capitalize
That's right.
on these moments. And Yuki did. He kept his cool, brought the car home,
Yep.
didn't make any mistakes. All weekend, to be fair.
Yeah.
Did his thing.
Yeah. And Ricardo ends up P12 after qualifying like P18.
Yeah.
With track limits, got his lap disqualified or not counted. Yeah, it just kind of, it sounded like his race pace was good, and it was there with Yuki's, but the fact that he started so far back meant he couldn't get any points this weekend. So yeah, he's still kind of floundering right now.
Yeah.
Lack of a better word.
There's been some chatter about whether he's lost the mojo again.
Yeah, if he's had his eye just on the Red Bull seat, and then all of a sudden he's just not focused on what he's doing anymore. I don't know.
He's got to get his head down, focus on beating his teammate, and
he's got to do his
doing the
job
best he
first.
can. Yeah.
Yep. Haas, on the other hand, is doing their job very well right now.
For
early
now.
on.
Yep, early on, early days.
I just saw your comments on the Haas
Double points finish. Let's go.
LFG, America.
Yeah.
Hulk P9, and he was able to get points without Magnussen
Blocking the other half
blocking
of
the entire
field,
track for 8 laps. And K-Make with a P10 with all these penalties and DNFs. So great result for them. That puts them, I guess, tied with V-Carb right now. Yuki's got 4 points. And
at P6 in the Constructors Championship?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're tied right now. And double points for Haas. So far, so good for the Komatsu era of Haas. Williams, this is an interesting one. Logan Sargent did not get to race. Why is that?
Logan Sargent did not get to race this weekend, Jordan, because he did not have a car. The
Was this
reason
because of communism?
The reason he didn't have a car is because Alex Albon crashed his car during a practice session.
But why does Albon crashing his car matter?
Well, when you scored 20 some odd points of your 20 some odd plus 1 points last year, the team feels it's indicative of your ability to drive. And
Even though you're not the one that crashed the car this time.
yeah, Logan didn't crash his car, but he was forced to give up his chassis because Albon's chassis was broken.
And they didn't have a spare one.
They didn't have a spare. Now, that's not Logan's fault. He didn't crash his car, and he didn't decide to not make a third chassis.
Or have one ready.
Or have one ready.
3 races into the season. Let's be clear.
They
We're
didn't
3 races in.
3 races in, and they don't have a spare chassis. Now, as a team, you know this. James Fowles knows this. The drivers know this. The strategists know this. Everyone in that team, bar the 18 people, probably know they don't have a spare chassis.
Yep.
So maybe they had a plan already in place. Like, hey, going into the season until we know we're going to get a spare chassis, if something like this happens, this is what's going to happen. Maybe they had a game plan, so it's just simply executing the game plan.
But it kind of feels like they didn't, based on the comments and like, yeah.
I mean, no matter what, they're going to have to justify their decision. I see what you're saying. Probably they didn't have a game plan, but maybe they just thought, look, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. It's a harsh reality for Logan Sargent, but dude, you scored 1 point last year
and 27, I think, or
27. I think, yeah, right. He scored the 27th point. You got your drive back for this year, but at the same time, like, your argument would be, look, Mr. Team Principal James Viles, this is my opportunity to show you, to prove to you why you kept me for this year.
Right.
Let me score you that point. Yes, Albon scored all the points last year or whatever, but give me this opportunity to prove my value. And he wasn't given that opportunity. It was taken from him.
Right.
And to make matters worse,
Albon finished P11,
which
one position out of the points.
Just doing the math here, carry the one, draw the zero. No, P11 does not get points.
No, they don't. Interesting. So, really disappointing for Sargent. Obviously, this weekend he got to drive.
It's a disappointing
P1
result.
and 2.
Yeah, for all of Williams.
Yes, it is. And I think the pressure that was on Albon probably was enormous.
Yep.
Going into the race and qualifying, for that matter, in FP3.
Yep.
I suppose. Mind you,
he didn't even put a lap in for Q2. They just saved
right?
tires. Yeah, he just didn't do a lap at all.
Yeah, and he crashed in the same spot last year during the race. Yeah, it was the same place he crashed too. So that's interesting. I guess just another tidbit, that only we care about.
It's also where George crashed, so it's a difficult.
Well, George crashed in a different spot of that. He didn't ride the curb and then get all squirrely. He kind of had other.
The corners don't change during the race.
Yeah, but some drivers.
I guess for Fernando, it did change for him.
It did. So very disappointing weekend for Williams from that aspect, but we'll see if they have a third chassis ready for Japan in a couple weeks.
I hope, or even just that one repaired.
I mean, they'll have to have it repaired, right? And then I don't know if they'll have a third chassis ready.
Some of the media today is saying they're in a race against time, and maybe they're just hyping up this journey, right? To be
I'm sure
we saved Logan's seat for the race.
Yeah, when it was his seat. That's his car.
Correct. It's like, there's nothing wrong with my.
Are you going to give him the bad chassis? Probably.
Yes, they will. They will.
That's the thing. Oh, how come you're not doing great?
I don't know if anyone's noticed, but on this channel, there's a conspiracy that we believe in, that there's an anti-America agenda within Formula One.
I don't know if you saw that Andretti wasn't allowed entry.
Right. Or that Haas is the worst team all the time. Conspiracies abound. Or that Logan Sargent never scores points somehow and then has his car stolen from him.
Within his own team.
Right. Come on.
This brings us to Alpine. I don't know, man. Oh, Gasly P13. I see your comments. He was passed 9 times.
There was only 24 overtakes in the entire race, and 9 of them were against Gasly.
So that shows you the status of Alpine's car. Ocon was P16, although Ocon got into Q2, I believe, this week.
Yeah, he did.
Due to Ricardo's DNF, or bad lap.
Yep. And quite honestly, like we said, Gasly was passed 9 times. There were points during the race where he was actually running in some significant points.
Like in 4th or 5th?
Yeah.
After the first round of pit stops, and he hadn't pit yet?
He hadn't pit yet. But all the same, I mean, like, he didn't bottle it. Neither one of them bottled it. Yeah.
Would have been there.
Look, P13 and P16 is not P19 and P18 and P20.
Correct. Well, there are only 19 cars this weekend because one got crashed out and didn't start.
Yeah, and then a couple other cars didn't finish.
But that's where Ocon ended up. But you got to finish. You got to be in it.
You got to be in it to win it, and
you got to be in it to finish P16. And 13.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. Ocon straight up did finish last.
So, I mean, this is where Alpine kind of expected themselves to be, which is tough.
But hopefully, they're able to right the ship. They got 2 more weeks. Is it them that's bringing an upgrade to Japan, or are they bringing an upgrade to China?
No, it's VCARB or Racing Bulls or RB. Is
well, hopefully Alpine's update just.
I think Ferrari is 2. Is that right? Or is that the one after China?
China,
or in a couple. They're bringing, or no, it's probably Imola. I bet.
Okay,
Imola. Goodness. Yeah, Ferrari's got one in the pipeline that they're amped about too. So we'll see. Sauber, or kick, Sauber, starter, kick, green, lime.
The green team. Wait, there's 2 green teams.
The neon lime green.
Yeah, Sauber. Sauber.
Bottas, P14, Joe, P15. They're still dealing with their lug nut issues. They can't, I don't know if it's the placement of the gun when they put it on. They can't basically get the lug nuts off their cars without stripping them or having other issues, causing long pit stops that are 40, 50 seconds long.
I was reading some stuff on this today.
Yeah.
They did 2 things during the offseason. Number 1, they're using new pit stop equipment.
Yep.
Which is allowing them to do pit stops faster.
Yes.
This is not the issue. They also changed the material for which they designed and manufactured their wheel nuts. When they tested the application of the new wheel nuts with the new equipment on the rims and the wheels and on the car during preseason or whatever, before they showed up to a race or even testing, I guess, there were no issues.
Heat expansion.
Heat causes things to expand. And this, when they're during the race environment, the wheels and the brakes and the heats and the airflow and all of that centered around that wheel nut is causing the materials to change. And so when they put on the new wheel nut, it's
essentially change shape, right?
Changing shape, and they're cross-threading it. So they know what the problem is. They need to fix the problem.
It sounds like they have a fix in the pipeline, but that takes away from
right. You just don't want
race
to
performances, other issues, other upgrades, and that the fact that they have to fix this,
and it's costing them money.
Yeah.
Well,
that's not great.
Not great. No,
and this happened the first 2 races so far, or 3 races.
All
now.
3 races. Yeah,
to at least one of them. And this race was both of them.
And it's sad to see it happen to 2 drivers who, right? Both of them are likable guys. You want to see them succeed.
You see all those magazine pictures Joe's in? All those Chinese magazines? It looks good.
He is
styling, man.
Probably the second most stylish person on the grid behind Hamilton.
Behind Louis?
Yeah.
Some might argue first.
Well, they could. They could.
There's a lot of pictures going on.
Speaking of Hamilton, DNF.
DNF. Engine issue. Yeah, what more can I say? It was early on in the race.
Yeah, it was within the first 15 laps or something.
Yeah, because I think some people would take advantage of the VSC that came out to pit. They hadn't pitted yet. Hamilton engine issue, DNF. Hopefully it's a one-off and not indicative of what's going on with cooling issues or whatever else. Because I think they had cooling issues in Bahrain, I think. Yeah, they're lifting coasting a lot too.
Yep.
Hopefully it's not indicative of that and their packaging or whatever they're doing.
No, that would be a big bummer.
Yeah. And then Russell, DNF, we kind of went over that with Alonso.
Yep. So a double DNF for Mercedes.
Not great.
Not great for them.
It's a long trip home, a long trip there to get nothing.
Hopefully they're able to recover, get some new engine for Hamilton, get a new engine for Hamilton so they can start Japan well. But boy, is this a increasingly difficult position for them to find themselves in, having succeeded so well prior to the regulations change. It's got to be hard for a lot of the folks inside the team. It's got to be hard for the drivers who, you're George Russell. You're going to a championship winning team and you're expecting a winning car and you've won 1 race in 3 seasons. You're Lewis Hamilton. You've won 6 drivers drivers championships with them.
7.
One with
6. One was McLaren, Mercedes. But
dude, you got to feel
to justify Lewis's move to Ferrari. He saw something coming.
He potentially, either he's got, again, we're 3 races in. There's a lot of opportunity for teams to improve. There's a lot of opportunity for teams to regress.
Yes.
Russell's DNF is not entirely his fault.
No.
The engine braking is not Hamilton's fault.
No, but
the car performance is everyone's fault.
They didn't qualify well.
Nope.
I mean, they were the back of the top 4 teams. So
Not a good omen. No.
no, so not a very good start for, or not a good weekend for Mercedes, I guess.
But next week, no, not this weekend. Next weekend.
Yeah, weekend after Easter.
Correct. We've got the Suzuka Grand Prix in Japan.
Japanese Grand Prix
At Suzuka. Excuse me.
should be fun.
Always fun.
McLaren should go well there. They did last year really well after their upgrades came through. I'm sure Red Bull, will be quick through there. We'll see if Yuki can do well in his home race and continue dominating there.
We'd also like to see Ferrari do well and continue this momentum. We'd really like to see a championship battle. We haven't had a battle.
If we can have a battle 4 races into the season this year, that'd be great.
That'd be nice
compared to last year.
I wonder if after Max's issues in Australia, he'll have to take any new components. Not that there would be any penalties for it.
I don't think so.
Because he'd still be within the allocation. However, will this have implications later in the season?
I don't think he will, because it was an engine gearbox, MGU.
Could be
brakes.
gearbox. I mean, like the gearbox
depends
is
how close it
connected
was
to the
to the
suspension,
fight.
and
Yeah.
that thing blew up.
That's true.
We'll see.
Yeah. Some narratives to look forward to.
Yep. And there's going to be some additional news. We've seen some different things. Will Sainz continue to improve his fitness? Will he be stronger yet for Japan? Will Perez find some momentum
somewhere?
Right. Both of those drivers don't have seats for next year, right? Will there be any early silly season rumors? Will we get some
Driver swaps?
Is Ricardo looking like he might get replaced by Liam Lawson?
Yep.
Will there be some Bierman news?
Yeah, we'll find
Sponsorships. Will Alpine sell more of their team to
somebody else, some other sports person?
Right.
Poor guys.
That's what we're looking for.
Yeah. Well, it's been fun, and we have this will probably conclude this episode. This has been your host, Jordan Win-Alden K-Well with The Pit Lane, and we'll talk to you next time.
Talk to you in a couple weeks.
Bye.
Bye.